All right, welcome back to Sunday Night Live. Christy Lee guest hosting today. So happy to be here with an amazing guest, Vera Sharav, who can really give us very poignant perspective on what we're seeing happen today. All of the medical tyranny, the attacks on free speech, with this unique perspective of being a Holocaust survivor herself. So, Vera, thank you for everything that you're doing and for being a voice in all of this and giving us that perspective. Let's start with some of your background for people that might not be fully aware of what you've been up to and what you've been through. Can you give me a brief history?
Yes, I was born in 1937 in Romania, and in 1941, my family was evicted from our home, and we were deported to a concentration camp in Ukraine. My father died there before I was 5. I was in the camp actually for 3 years. This was not a death camp. It was a kind of camp where they left you to starve. Nothing was given out. It wasn't regimented. But the fear of death was always hovering there because there were lists that would be put out periodically. And if you were put on the list, you could be sent to a death camp or a slave labor camp.
And how were you able to escape that situation?
Well, in 1944, when the Nazis, the final solution was in full swing, they were going to evacuate all the camps and exterminate all the Jews. My mother got wind of a rescue mission for some Jewish orphans. And so she put me on the list, even though I was not technically an orphan. But she put me on the list to save my life. And I left on one of the cattle car trains that continued to bring the Jews to the death camps. En route, one of the things that I remember very vividly and very painful, we were actually allowed to get off once to relieve ourselves. Those who were en route to the camps were never allowed that luxury. And when we got back, one of the children, although she really wasn't a child like the rest of us, she may have been 18 or something like that. She came back, she found a baby in the ditch. And she wanted to take that baby, to save the baby. And they wouldn't let her. And they beat her off the train. And I watched in horror because I knew that they would both die. Either they'd be shot or just left to die. And I was just so horrified because I realized that I couldn't do that. I knew that I couldn't do that. I couldn't risk my life that way. And I realized that what she was doing was, beyond what I could do. So I always had kind of a feeling of being selfish. It's six and a half.
That's how old you were at the time, 6.5 when you saw that?
Yeah.
Wow. Unbelievable. I mean, being a Holocaust survivor, I mean, there's been a form of obviously great reverence for what people went through and respect. But once you started saying that you were seeing similarities of what was happening today with what you had witnessed and experienced during that awful time, some of that respect, you weren't getting it, right?
You see, the Holocaust didn't just happen overnight. Hitler took over control in January of 1933. The exterminations didn't begin until 1941-42. But during those years that led up to the final solution, there were stages of discrimination, of humiliation, of making Jews into demons. They demonized Jews as the spreaders of infectious diseases. Jews were demonized as lice. So when COVID was launched, because we now absolutely know that this was a laboratory manufactured virus, the orders, the state of emergencies and government edicts that were totally against really our health and well-being were being forced on people. And that was the way the Nazis operated. Hitler, when he declared a state of emergency, he suspended all aspects of democracy and ruled by executive order. And that's exactly what happened in all the Western European countries, in the United States, Canada, Australia, everywhere they announced an emergency, and just totally wiped away all our freedom, our civil rights, and our right to make decisions about our own lives and about our children's lives. And the horror was that I saw that people were obeying, and that's exactly what the Germans did. Obedience is what essentially gives tyrants their power. Without people's obedience, they have no power. We are the many. If people would have resisted, they couldn't have gotten away with it. And when you obey, when you give that kind of power to, a ruler, they're never satiated. They keep eliminating more and more of your rights until finally it's really mass murder and genocide. That's what makes it possible.
I mean,
on the other hand,
sorry, go ahead.
But what I'm going to say also is that after all, I was a child then, and later on, I wanted to know more, to understand the Holocaust, to understand how it could have happened. How could people, and by now, there are books that estimate that 1 million people participated in the slaughter, in the various discriminatory edicts. This was not just a few bad apples, a few monsters. No. The entire society was infected, and did things that, as many people realized, they were shocked because before Hitler, these were decent people. Germany was the highest, most established, most civilized country, in the world. American doctors would go to Germany for postdoctoral education because they were far advanced. So how is it that an advanced society can become murderous butchers?
So corrupted. And I mean, now we're seeing more escalated tensions of possibly heading into another World War situation. You have Germany sending tanks to Ukraine, violating their agreements with Russia. What do you think when you see these actual physical things happening instead of all of the rhetoric, which is acted out upon, but now you're seeing actual movement toward an actual war? What is that like to see?
Well, wars are not really about conflicts between peoples. Wars are about profits. And particularly, the arms industry needs places to test out their new armaments, their new killing methods. And so there are corporate and dynastic interests in having one war after another. We in America have had now something like 8 wars which were acknowledged to be unwinnable. Why? Mm-hmm. And this war, Germany vis-a-vis Russia, is repeated 3-4 times. It's essentially, it's like a war to destroy the universe.
The similarity.
Germany,
go ahead.
Several wars when they tried to take over Russia. I mean, this is a constant.
Yeah.
Why do they do it now with nuclear weapons? I mean, that poisons the air, the earth, everything. That's lunacy.
Is it especially frightening that, in part, why the Holocaust was able to end, and that we were able to stop all of the propaganda that was happening, all of the medical tyranny? It was like the U.S. that came in and intervened in part to make that stop. But now we're seeing those things happen in the U.S. So it's like, what do you have to say about, like, well, who's going to save us from all of this now?
The truth is that this time there will be no saviors. At the end of World War II, there were Allied armies who came and saved people. Those who survived the Holocaust were saved. Mm-hmm. They were rescued by the Allied forces, including the Russian, the American, and the British. There will be no armed forces at all to save anyone now. There will be no attics or cellars to hide in if people go along and accept a digital identification.
So that's the point you're really making, is that there will be no savior this time. And so we must save ourselves. And the way that we do that is by civil disobedience. That's what you're warning us to do, right? I know that this is a very personal subject for you because you're especially passionate about the medical tyranny and what seems to be mass experimentation on society. And part of that is, didn't your son even have an injury from a medication?
Yes, my son died of a prescribed medication. And New York State Department of Mental Health tried to coerce the coroner to change the cause of death. Mm.
Which we've seen happen over and over and over again in this pandemic. They won't list the cause of death. If it is the vaccine, they will not list it. They don't pay attention to the VAERS. And so you experienced this firsthand, but with a different medication. And you saw this happen. And what came out of that?
Well, nothing. That medication is still being prescribed. Mm. Psychiatric medications, they really aren't medications because they do not either cure or even alleviate. What they do is they mask symptoms. They're really like chemical straitjackets to calm people, but they ruin people's organs and bodies, and yet the doctors continue to prescribe. Part of it is because of the financial remuneration. The entire system is really corrupted by kickbacks. Mm-hmm. Need to call it what it is. And so by now what has happened is that the entire medical establishment is dependent, on government and pharmaceutical kickbacks. There is no polite way of saying it, really. They don't like that, but that's what it is. Look, in terms of the pandemic, right early on in March and April of 2020, how is it that in all the Western European countries, in Australia, Canada, United States, in the United States, it was about 5 states, government officials ordered hospitals not to treat the elderly, to send them to nursing homes. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And some were, if they were in the hospital, they were put on ventilators, and it was death.
Mm-hmm.
And, in New York, it was 80% of those who were put on ventilators died. Nevertheless, that was the protocol.
Mm-hmm.
And Governor Cuomo, before he gave the order to hospitals not to treat the elderly, he gave immunity both to hospitals and nursing homes. And he predicted this virus in nursing homes will be like fire through dry grass. And then he ordered it anyway. Mm. That's premeditated medical murder.
Absolutely insane.
Nobody has been held accountable. Now, the thing about it is that it parallels, it is an exact parallel to a Nazi program, the T4 project. Mm-hmm. The T4 project targeted, this was not targeting Jews. It was the first medical murder project in history, really. And the first victims were infants and young children under the age of 3. They were disabled in some way. Mm-hmm. And then they moved it up to children of all ages. Then it was the mentally ill. They cleared out all the asylums, and then the nursing home residents. Mm-hmm. And this was premeditated medical murder. They targeted the disabled, just as they targeted Jews. They targeted the disabled. Mm-hmm. And they also rationalized that they needed the hospital beds for wounded soldiers because the soldiers were worthy, but the elderly were not. And that's exactly the mentality that still exists in public health.
Oh, and we're seeing it ramp up for sure, especially to our neighbors in the North, Canada, and all of the efforts that they're doing to just normalize euthanizing, especially the elderly and the disabled. You're going to be covering that and so much more in your documentary, the 5-part series, Never Again is Now Global. Anyone can go to neveragain.isnowglobal.com, neveragain.isnowglobal.com. You're going to be hearing from Vera Sharav, a survivor, and other Holocaust survivors are going to be featured, as we showed in the trailer. Curious, I see that you have that we are going to be hearing from other survivors. Have you gotten pushback from any other Holocaust survivors, or who do you feel like you've gotten the most pushback from by making these comparisons of then and now?
Not yet, but you may generate it. Depending.
So no Holocaust survivors themselves have given you pushback. They see the similarities as well.
Absolutely. This documentary went without a script, without anything preconceived. I let the people talk their own truths, what they observed, they were bursting to talk because they are recognizing what I do as well, which is that unless we speak out, unless we stop this, it will be an absolute devastation, much worse. It's on a global scale. This time, they want to be rid of most people in the world.
So scary. So definitely you're passionate about the medical tyranny. What comparisons can you make in terms of censorship and only allowing people to hear one side? I mean, I'm mostly keenly aware of that, just having been in the journalism business for so long, and just suddenly now only you can give one narrative and what happened to both sides. I mean, there's been articles that have literally said it's dangerous to give both sides. I mean, and this is a tenet of journalism, to give both sides. So do you cover that in this series as well, just the comparisons of propaganda?
Censorship is always the way of the dictator. That's the way they hold control. by controlling the narrative. During the Second World War, they didn't have as much outlets as we do now. They had radio and newspaper, and it was totally controlled by the Nazis. And anyone who spoke out or tried, they really immediately got rid of them. They killed a lot of different people who spoke out. Today, this is what we've been on. We've been under this cloud for 3 years of one side of a narrative, one side of science. There is no the science. When Fauci said that when you criticize him, you're criticizing the science, that's nonsense. There is no the science. Science is constantly changing, constantly accumulating new knowledge and having to accommodate that new knowledge. That's how science works. Science works by debate, by scientists arguing, because there is a lot of different conflicting information. So all of the kind of things we were told, the masks, for example, that's totally asinine. Do you know that there was a study in 1918 during the epidemic, which was not influenza either, by the way, but there was a study of hospital staff. Half of them were masked and half not. And guess what? Just as every study, hundreds of them by now, have shown, masks do not prevent infection or transmission of infection or anything. This is total nonsense. But what they do is they show that you're obedient. I consider the masks that when we had to wear them, now we sort of don't have to, but some people still think it's the right thing to do because they were told. I consider masks the equivalent of the yellow star that I had to wear, because it is not something positive for my well-being or anybody's well-being at all. We've been lied to, these 3 years.
And you're allowed to say these things. I mean, that's what kind of blows me away is you are a Holocaust survivor. You are seeing these similarities. You're speaking out about the similarities. You've told me that you've talked to other Holocaust survivors. They're on the same page. They're like, this is happening all over again, trying to warn people. But if I go on social media, or if anybody else goes on social media and dares to make comparisons to the Holocaust, we will get, oh my gosh, like either kicked off or how dare you make these comparisons when you actually have the right to talk about this. What do you think about that? Why do people come at you so much for saying, I have a good reason I'm saying this. I'm not trying to downplay anything that happened. What do you think about that?
What they really are doing is they're making the Holocaust irrelevant to history and irrelevant now. That is a crime against the victims. We who have been there, and those before us who are no longer here, but who were survivors, like Elie Wiesel, who was the chairman of the Holocaust Commission to the president, warned. They always said, we have to remember so that it doesn't happen again, so that our antenna is out there to recognize the ominous signals before they go too far. Yeah. That was then. Now they have created a situation of making the Holocaust something totally out of the, out of people's experience.
Probably because they don't want us to see the comparisons. Vera, I'm out of time, but everybody, you have to see this. NeverAgainIsNowGlobal.com. NeverAgainIsNowGlobal.com. We thank you so much for your bravery and your courage to be a voice crying in the wilderness, trying to warn people. I know from experience, I've seen this before. We are going down a very dangerous path. And you are the person that needs to say that. But, folks, share this clip because she's able to say it. And see NeverAgainIsNowGlobal.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.